Today, let us take a trip back in time to sometime a little bit before the First World War, when giant battleships blast the living crap out of each other in the skies over Europe. This is Leviathans by Catalyst Games Lab. It was released approximately back 10 years ago in I think 2012. And before I get too far in this video, no, this has nothing to do with the new Kickstarter that's launching next week. It's called Trendjacking. This is the original starter set. Now I have played this game, however I was playing a friend's copy, so you'll see in a moment here this game is basically new in the box. I don't think I used anything out of it, but I have played it. Now Leviathans is effectively a naval combat game. It's alternative history in World War I-ish, where the giant battleships fly because some Polish scientists created some cool way to make big things fly. Nikola Tesla, for you guys who like that guy, he's in the story, but he's not the main reason these ships fly because, you know, something different. Now in terms of the components of this game, it's kind of a miniatures battle game, sort of like Battletech, where you have miniatures, but you also have a hex map. So you do that kind of thing with measuring ranges and hexes and all that fun stuff. And we'll get a little bit more in detail in that in just a moment. But let's take a look at exactly what's inside the box. First up, poster of all the different warships. You've got a sales flyer because, you know, you want to sell stuff. More stuff for your game. You know how that works. Here you go. This is a quick reference sheet. Here's a primer on the world. And then we've got some tokens for gameplay stuff. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Next up are the hex maps. This version of the game actually got really nice, heavy-duty cardstock hex maps. None of those cheap paper things you get with Battletech. You've got historical cards on the ships over here to give them their history. And then you've got the actual game stat cards. Now I'm pretty sure these cards have that fun, cool little laminated coating to it that you can use a dry erase marker on them. Here are your dice. This is a D12 based game. Well, D12 in terms of the shape of the dice. Each of the colors has different probabilities for different numbers, so they're not actually normal D12s. There may be one normal D12, but for the most part they're not. There's some six-sided dice in here. You've got a string for measuring line of sight. Once again, a little Battletech trick for some people like to use that. And then finally, you've got some... Actually, before I say finally, because you want to see what's sitting over here, don't you? That's the miniatures. Got a couple little novellas about the history of the game. There are 2 rule books in this set. This is a quick start rule book. This is like a level 2 rule book. There is a level 3 rule book that I don't have. That doesn't come in this set, and it even adds more stuff to the game. And then finally, for real this time, here are the miniatures. So this game comes with a total of 8 miniatures. You have 2 battleship classes. One of these, I think it's, I don't remember. One of these is the Leviathan itself, which is the British version of the Dreadnought type flying thing. These, I believe, were light cruisers, and these 4 guys over here were destroyers. Down here in the corner are flight stands. Now, the level 3 version of the game I mentioned a little bit ago has elevation to it, so that's why you use these many flight stands, and there's also some clear, transparent hex bases in there. Now, if you want to look for scale, here they are next to a Warhammer 40,000 Terminator. Just kidding. This is an old 6mm epic scale Warhammer Terminator. Here's an actual proper-sized Warhammer 40,000 Terminator. So, they're pretty good-sized miniatures. They definitely have a big steampunk feel to them, as well as some vibes of a World War I era dreadnought and other type of warship, because that's kind of what they're supposed to be, flying World War I battleships and support craft. The box does not specifically call them pre-painted miniatures, but they have some basic color to them. There does appear to be a little bit of painting on them. I'm not sure if like the gold pieces, if they're actually painted, or if they're separate. Okay, no, they're painted. They're painted. So there's some basic painting to them, but frankly, if you put some wash on these and a little bit of dry brushing, they look pretty good without too much extra work on your part. Now, just a few notes on miniatures like this, because one of the weird things about historical-ish miniatures, obviously is sci-fi fantasy, sometimes I feel gamers are a bit, what do you say, spoiled with sci-fi stuff, because things can look however you want. This is the French and the British fleet, and they kind of look the same because the reality is World War I warships all kind of look the same. That's sort of historically accurate. And so, you know, there are differences between the two of them, but they're not super obvious. but that's the way it would be, right? I mean, it's one of those kind of things, right? So, whatever. The only real complaint I'd have about the miniatures, when I played this game with my friends, there's these little masts, and like, I don't know if they're antennae or sensor towers or whatever they're supposed to be. They're tiny, fiddly bits of plastic, and they will break off on you. Let's take a look at one of the quick reference cards to get an idea of how the basic gist of this game plays out. You've got the initiative phase where players roll off, and the player with their team in that matter with the lowest result is going to go first throughout the turn. Then you move on to the firing torpedoes. Now I'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but what you're essentially doing is kind of targeting where your torpedoes are going to go, and this allows you to mess with the opponent's movement, because if you end up moving into a torpedo, bad things can happen. Then you get to the actual ship movement phase. Now this is a bit of a you go, I go thing, but each of the warships has a type of size to them, right? Size something, other, whatnot, whatever word they use. Basically, size 4, size 2, size 1. And teams go back and forth, moving each of their largest size in every ship they have of that size, and then it goes to the other player who then moves all of their ships of the largest size, and back and forth like that. Size 4 ships move first, then size 3, size 2, and then size 1. So the idea being the little guys are a little bit more agile and nimble, and they can react to what the bigger ships are doing, otherwise they just get blown out of the sky pretty darn quick. Now, when it comes to movement, as I mentioned a bit ago, this game is sort of a relatively standard-ish naval type rule set. There's a lot of similarities with your typical navies, whether it be in the water or the navies in space. But there are a few differences. First of all, there's no velocity in this game. So you've got movement points each turn that you can expend, and those are used to move in a sort of Battletech-ish type thing, where one space moves you a hex forward, one movement point and you can turn left or right, but there are restrictions. If you look at one of the larger ships, what you're going to see in the corner is something that says, enter hexes before turn. And what this is basically saying is that ship must move that many hexes forward before it can execute a turn. Now, it's one of those kind of things where you got to think back 10 years ago, and I even consulted the rule book. I'm not sure if that's the number of hexes you have to move between each turn, or just for the year before your very first turn. Games do it different ways. And these ships do have one other trick they can do. It's called the side slip, where instead of moving just straight forward, they can kind of move also just off to the side, either left or right, or sorry, port or starboard. We're in naval terminology right here. And it's really just a little unique mechanic to add a bit more of that flavor of the airship versus having a ship in the water. Let's talk some tactics in the form of screening. This is one of the token sheets right here. There's only two different tokens. One says defensive screening and one says offensive screening. And the idea being here is that these warships kind of position themselves to either A, protect other warships, so you can kind of use defensive screening where what you're trying to do is fly yourself in between an attacker and a target, and therefore take hits for said target. That's what defensive is for. Offensive, if I remember correctly, is the idea you're trying to kind of hide behind another ship. So the idea is the little guys can essentially fly close and be behind, say, one of the big Leviathans, and therefore not get shot by somebody that's on the other side of the Leviathan. Then you've got the torpedo token sheet. Now, just like the other one, there's two types of tokens here. You have torpedo launch tokens and torpedo target tokens. Now, each one of these is paired up. So, for example, this is torpedo launch number 7 right here, and next to it, on the other side, is torpedo target number 7. What happens is before movement, during that torpedo launch phase, for any ships that have torpedoes and are firing them, what it's going to do is you're going to put down a torpedo launch token on the ship's hex, and then you're going to place the torpedo target token with a matching number, ideally face down. There's different ways you can play it. Somewhere off where it's within arc and within range of the attack. And then after the movement, if any of these warships finds itself between that torpedo launch token and the torpedo target token, it's going to get hit by that torpedo and take a crap ton of damage. So I kind of hinted at before, the idea is you're sort of setting up a minefield type thing that your enemies have to either go through and take hits, or try to avoid and just navigate around, and therefore you can use them to get a bit of a tactical advantage over your enemy forces. When it comes to combat, you get a lot of these colored 12-sided dice here. As I mentioned before, they have different sets of numbers on them. So some are weaker numbers where it only goes up to, I believe, 4, and some of them do go all the way up to 12. And this is a bit of an interesting system they have for firing weapons. The reason is they're trying to kind of, in some ways, simplify your old school BattleTech type thing where you've got a bunch of modifiers. And how it breaks down is various weapons have certain colors of dice for their short range and long range. So you start by taking the color of the dice. You get crew bonuses as long as they're not dead. So you get extra dice for crews. Then you can factor in the speed and the side of the target, and that gives you an extra die. Whether if they're going slow, you get a better die to your attack roll. If they're going faster, you get a lower quality die. And then finally, there are 6-sided dice here that help you determine which target spot you hit. So once you figure out, line of sight, firing arc, you also got to figure out what arc on the side is being hit. You roll all your dice together, and all the 12-sided dice are going to add up to a value. And then you're going to get a D6 value. And you can figure out which slot for the D6 got hit. So slot number 1 is going to be at the top, slot number 6 will be at the bottom. And then you can compare the total of all the D12 dice to see if it either meets or exceeds the value there, because there's a little armor number for each of the locations. If it does, it destroys that location. Then it's the whole process where destroyed locations get hit again. It's a chance the ship blows up. And eventually you take enough damage, the ship is destroyed. But also each of these locations, for the most part, are going to go ahead and negatively impact the performance of your warship. So it's going to be loss of crew, loss of weapons, loss of maneuverability, loss of speed, those kind of things. And there's effectively 3 ways to fire your guns depending on what abilities they have. So not all guns can do all of them. There's your standard way of firing, which I kind of described before, where you calculate up a bunch of D12s, roll them all at once, and you compare it to a single location on the target. There's something called bracketing firepower. So some guns that can be linked together, in this case on the Montcalm, you have 2 guns up front that can be linked together, and you can fire them once, and you get the bonus of having both of their basically power dice added to your pool, so you get a single more powerful shot instead of 2 less powerful shots. And finally, some of the big guns have something called saturating fire, where you put out so much firepower, you actually roll 2 slots dice over here, and you can potentially destroy 2 different locations with those mega broadsides, and those are things that Leviathan class warships have. And that is the basic gist of this game. It's a naval combat game in the atmosphere. There are a few more details, of course, like you can ram each other, because people always want ramming in naval ship games. Do you know how many people get really annoyed that in my game, Legends of Kaladeshi, there's no ramming? It drives people crazy. But you can't ram in space, people. It's really hard to do. If you've got 2 warships in space that are trying to maneuver, and they both are fully capable of maneuvering, you really can't ram each other. Unless one ship has a much better maneuverability than the other, which in that case, why are you trying to do that? It's probably a bad tactical decision. Anyway, but this is actually in the air, not space, so go ahead and ram people. It's a heck of a lot of fun. Other than that, you've got some extra scenarios in the back here for playing the game, optional rules for some basic weather effects, and some other little things like that. And there are a few pages back here they call the Captain's Manual excerpt. The Captain's Manual being that level 3 rules I talked about a minute ago, or I guess it's probably a while ago at the start of the video at this point. But this gives you a little bit more advanced rules, like variable crew skill and some things like that, if you want to try to make your battles a little bit more interesting. But with that, I think that's about all I've got to talk about with this game. There is a pretty nice book here, as I've been showing off, that gives a lot of information about the universe in which it takes place, including the power structures, political dynamics, what's going on, the time this game takes place, and all that fun stuff. So thank you guys all for watching. Once again, I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield. If you enjoy these classic game commentaries, leave a comment down below, and perhaps I will get to one that I might still have sitting around somewhere. I still have StarCraft the board game. I'll pull that out someday. Oh, that was an epic game back in the day. It really was. I also have some weird 1960s kind of hybrid chess thing that's kind of strange. I bought a garage over $4, but alas, that is me going off the rails. So, alright guys, well I'll see you next time.